Jun-ho was not a detective. He was an archivist, a quiet man in his early 30s who spent his days surrounded by dust and dead files in the basement of one of Seoul's largest insurance corporations. His world was organized, predictable, and silent. Every morning he swiped his card, descended 2 floors below ground, and sat before a terminal that held the final records of thousands of cancelled policies. His job was simple. When a file was marked for permanent archive, he verified the data, ensured the digital copies matched the scanned originals, and closed the case. No one ever visited the archive. No one asked questions. The work was considered a dead end for anyone who had once dreamed of more. Jun-ho had never dreamed of much. He was competent, methodical, and content to let the years pass in the hum of the server racks. But that was before he noticed the anomaly. It started with a routine cross-check. A request from the compliance team asked for a list of all policies that had been terminated due to unforeseen patient unavailability over the past 5 years. Jun-ho ran the query and watched the numbers scroll across his screen. Among the thousands of results, one name appeared repeatedly in the agent field: Park Sung-min, a senior agent who had retired 3 years earlier. That alone was not suspicious. Retired agents often had long histories. But when Jun-ho filtered the data by the cause of termination, a pattern emerged that made his fingers stop over the keyboard. Of the 47 cases where a patient had died within weeks of their policy being cancelled, all 47 had been handled by Park Sung-min. Jun-ho stared at the screen for a long time. He was not a suspicious man by nature, but numbers did not lie. He opened the first file. A woman, 53 years old, diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. Her treatment had been approved, the costs covered under a premium policy she had held for 11 years. Then, a month before her death, the policy was cancelled due to non-payment. The file noted that the patient had been unreachable for 3 months. Jun-ho opened the second file. A man, 47, with an aggressive form of leukemia. The same rare disease classification, the same premium policy, the same sudden cancellation for non-payment. Death followed 6 weeks later. Jun-ho opened a third, a fourth, a 10th. Each time the details varied slightly: age, disease, hospital, but the skeleton was identical. All 47 had been diagnosed with conditions so expensive to treat that the insurance payouts would have exceeded several $100,000 each. All 47 had been paying their premiums on time until the final 3 months, when their payments mysteriously stopped. And all 47 had been alone. Jun-ho checked the addresses, the emergency contacts, the family records. In every case, the patient was listed as living alone, with no spouse, no children, and no designated guardian. When the payments stopped, there was no one to call, no one to ask why. The policies were cancelled automatically by the system after 90 days of delinquency. And then, within weeks, the patient died. Jun-ho leaned back in his chair. His mouth was dry. He knew, with the certainty of someone who had spent a decade handling data, that this was not a coincidence. But he also knew that the police had already looked at this. A year ago, a junior officer had requested the same files and concluded it was a tragic string of coincidences. The case was closed. Jun-ho was just an archivist. But he could not stop seeing the number. Over the following week, Jun-ho did something he had never done before. He began to dig in silence. He did not tell his supervisor, because his supervisor was a man who valued paperwork over questions. He did not tell the compliance team, because they had already signed off on the closure. Instead, Jun-ho used his access to the archive to pull every piece of data connected to the 47 cases. He worked after hours, staying long after the cleaning crew had come and gone, his only light the blue glow of the terminal. He built a spreadsheet in a private folder, cross-referencing dates, amounts, hospitals, and the names of the attending physicians. The pattern became sharper. In each case, the policy cancellation was triggered exactly 93 days after the last payment, an odd number that suggested a manual override. The system was programmed to wait 120 days before cancellation, but these files showed a different interval. Someone with access had changed the grace period on each of these policies individually. That someone, Jun-ho discovered, was Park Sung-min. The retired agent had not merely sold these policies, he had maintained administrative access to them years after they were active. Jun-ho searched for Park Sung-min's current status. The company directory listed him as retired, living in a residential complex outside Seoul. No longer an employee, but his credentials had never been fully revoked. That meant that until someone closed the back door, Park Sung-min could still log in and modify policies from his home computer. Jun-ho checked the most recent activity logs. 3 weeks ago, someone using Park Sung-min's credentials had accessed the file of a current policyholder, a woman named Kang Soo-jin, age 39, diagnosed with a rare neurological condition. Her policy was still active, but the grace period had been reduced from 120 days to 90. Her last payment was recorded 47 days ago. If the pattern held, she had 43 days left before her policy would be cancelled. Jun-ho searched for Kang Soo-jin's address. It was a 15-minute walk from his own apartment. He searched for her emergency contacts. The field was blank. Her family information showed only a deceased mother and no other relatives. She lived alone. Jun-ho sat in the basement archive and felt the weight of the pattern closing around him. He understood now what had happened to the 47. They had been selected because they had no one. No one to notice when the bills stopped being paid. No one to question why the insurance company had suddenly withdrawn coverage. No one to hold anyone accountable. They had died alone, their rare diseases progressing without treatment, and their files had been quietly archived as administrative failures. Jun-ho had never spoken to a detective in his life. He had never made a phone call to the police, never filed a report, never even been a witness to anything. But he knew that the police had already dismissed the case. The only evidence was in the numbers, and the numbers were buried in a system that the police did not have access to. If he went to them with a spreadsheet and a theory about a retired insurance agent, they would look at him the way his supervisor looked at him, like a quiet archivist who had spent too long in the dark. He needed something more. He needed to see if the pattern was still active. That night, Jun-ho walked to the address listed for Kang Soo-jin. The building was a modest high-rise in a quiet neighborhood. He stood across the street for nearly an hour, watching the entrance. At 9:15, a woman in a gray coat exited, moving slowly, leaning slightly to one side as if her balance was uncertain. She had short dark hair and a tired face. She walked to the corner convenience store, bought a few items, and returned. Jun-ho did not approach her. He simply watched, committing her face to memory. She was alive. For now. But the clock was already ticking. Jun-ho returned to the archive the next morning with a plan that felt both reckless and painfully logical. He could not go to the police without proof of active harm, and he could not stop Park Sung-min without understanding how the scheme worked. So he decided to watch the data in real time. Using his own credentials, he set up a silent alert on Kang Soo-jin's policy. Any access, any change, any attempt to modify the grace period would trigger a notification to a private email account he had created the night before. Then he began to trace the financial side of the 47 closed cases. If the policies were cancelled, the insurance company had avoided paying out millions of dollars in treatments. But that money did not simply disappear. It remained in the company's reserves, except that in each case, Jun-ho noticed a secondary transaction, a service fee credited to an external consulting firm called Meridian Advisory. The fees were small enough to avoid scrutiny, never more than a few $1,000s per case, but multiplied by 47, they added up to a significant sum. Jun-ho searched for Meridian Advisory. The firm was registered to a post office box in Hong Kong. Its sole listed director was a man named Choi Dae-young, about whom Jun-ho could find nothing else. But when he cross-referenced Choi Dae-young's address with Park Sung-min's personal records, his heart began to beat faster. Park Sung-min's wife, before her death 5 years ago, had been named Choi Eun-suk. Choi Dae-young was her brother. The scheme was not just about saving the company money. It was a carefully constructed funnel: cancel the policies of isolated patients with expensive diseases, let them die without treatment, and pay a consulting fee to a shell company controlled by the agent's brother-in-law. The money was laundered, the deaths were written off as administrative failures, and no one had ever connected the dots because no one had ever looked at all 47 files together. Jun-ho looked at them now, 47 ghosts staring back from his screen, and made a decision. He would not wait for the police. He would not wait for Kang Soo-jin's policy to be cancelled. He would find Park Sung-min himself. The address for Park Sung-min was a 2-bedroom apartment in a retirement complex in Bundang, an hour south of Seoul. Jun-ho went on a Saturday, wearing plain clothes and carrying nothing but his phone. He had no training for this. He was an archivist who had spent his entire career in a basement, and now he was walking toward the home of a man who, he believed, had orchestrated the deaths of 47 people. The complex was quiet, filled with elderly residents tending small gardens or sitting on benches. Jun-ho found the building and waited in a lobby area until he saw a man exit the elevator. Park Sung-min was in his late 60s, trim, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a leather satchel and walked with the easy confidence of someone who had never been challenged. Jun-ho followed him at a distance as he walked to a nearby cafe, ordered an Americano, and sat by the window with a tablet. Jun-ho took a seat 2 tables away, his back turned, his ears straining to hear anything. But Park Sung-min did not speak. He worked on his tablet, occasionally smiling at whatever he was reading. After 30 minutes, Jun-ho saw the screen reflected faintly in the window glass. It was a login page for the insurance company. Park Sung-min was still accessing the system. Jun-ho's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his own phone and opened the email alert he had set. There were no new notifications. Kang Soo-jin's policy remained unchanged. But Park Sung-min was online now, browsing files, and Jun-ho could not see which ones. He sat in the cafe for another hour, watching the reflection, until Park Sung-min closed the tablet, finished his coffee, and left. Jun-ho followed again, this time back to the apartment building. He waited until Park Sung-min entered his unit, then lingered in the hallway long enough to confirm the door number. He was about to leave when he heard a voice from inside, speaking on the phone. The words were muffled, but Jun-ho caught one phrase clearly: the last one needs to be clean. No family, no records. Just like before. Jun-ho stood frozen in the hallway, his back against the wall, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain it could be heard through the door. He had heard enough. He left the building quickly, not running, but walking with a controlled urgency that felt like running. He did not look back. That night, Jun-ho did not sleep. He sat in his small apartment with the lights off, staring at the spreadsheet he had built, replaying the words he had heard in the hallway. The last one needs to be clean. No family, no records. Just like before. He understood now that Kang Soo-jin was not the only target. She was the last one on a new list. There had been others after the 47, others whose files had not yet reached the archive because the process was still ongoing. Jun-ho opened the system again from his home computer, using his work credentials. He ran a new query: policies with rare disease writers, held by individuals with no family contacts, sold by Park Sung-min, that were currently active. The search returned 8 names. 8 people, still alive, whose policies had been quietly modified to reduce their grace periods. The earliest was already 89 days delinquent. That person would lose coverage in 1 day. Jun-ho checked the name: a man named Lee Myung-soo, 59, living alone in Incheon. His last payment was recorded 92 days ago. Tomorrow, if the pattern held, his policy would be cancelled. Jun-ho grabbed his jacket and left the apartment. He did not have a car, so he took the last subway train to Incheon, arriving after midnight. He found Lee Myung-soo's building, a worn-down residential complex near the waterfront. He rang the doorbell of the ground-floor apartment. No answer. He rang again. Finally, a voice, weak and muffled, asked who was there. Jun-ho said the only thing he could think of: "I'm from the insurance company. There's a problem with your policy. I need to speak with you." The door opened a crack. A man in his late 50s, gaunt, with hollow cheeks and trembling hands, peered out. He was clearly ill. Jun-ho saw the hospital bracelet still on his wrist. He explained quickly, gently, that his payments had stopped being recorded, that his policy was about to be cancelled, that he needed to contact the bank first thing in the morning. Lee Myung-soo stared at him with confused, frightened eyes. He said he had been paying every month, by automatic transfer. He showed Jun-ho his bank statements on his phone. The payments were being made, but they were being redirected. Jun-ho could see it immediately, to a different account number, 1 digit off from the legitimate one. A deliberate error. The money was leaving Lee Myung-soo's account, but the insurance company was not receiving it. Jun-ho helped the man call his bank's emergency line and reported the fraudulent transfer. Then he left him with a promise to return the next day. On the subway back to Seoul, Jun-ho felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose, heavy and cold. When Jun-ho arrived at work on Monday morning, he knew he had run out of time to act silently. Lee Myung-soo's policy had been flagged for cancellation at midnight. Although Jun-ho had helped him stop the fraudulent payments, the damage was already recorded in the system. The cancellation order was automated and would execute within 48 hours unless someone with authority intervened. Jun-ho could not intervene; he did not have the clearance to override a cancellation. But Park Sung-min did. And Park Sung-min, Jun-ho was certain, was waiting for the cancellation to go through so that Lee Myung-soo would become the 48th name on his list. Jun-ho made a decision. He printed all 47 case files, the financial records linking Meridian Advisory to Park Sung-min's brother-in-law, the evidence of the redirected payments, and the list of the 8 current targets. He placed everything in a sealed envelope and walked to the office of the company's chief compliance officer, a woman named Director Han who had a reputation for being stern but uncorrupted. He knocked, entered, and placed the envelope on her desk. He told her, in the same calm, methodical voice he used to archive files, that he believed a former agent had been systematically defrauding the company and causing the deaths of policyholders. He explained the pattern, the grace period modifications, the shell company, and the 8 active cases. Director Han listened without interruption. When he finished, she opened the envelope and began to read. After several minutes, she looked up and asked why he had not gone to the police. Jun-ho told her that the police had already looked at one case and found nothing. He said he believed the pattern was only visible when all 47 were examined together. Director Han was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the corporate security office. She gave 3 instructions: freeze Park Sung-min's access credentials immediately, flag all 8 active policies for review, and contact the Financial Crimes Unit of the Seoul Metropolitan Police. Jun-ho stood in front of her desk, waiting. She looked at him and said, very quietly, "You should go home now. Do not speak to anyone about this. We will handle it from here." Jun-ho went home, but he did not rest. He spent the day watching his email for the alert he had set on Kang Soo-jin's policy. At 3 in the afternoon, it came. Someone had attempted to log in using Park Sung-min's credentials. The attempt had been blocked. Director Han's order had been executed. But the fact that someone had tried meant that Park Sung-min had likely received word that something was wrong. He was trying to cover his tracks. Jun-ho's phone rang 20 minutes later. It was Director Han. Her voice was tense. Park Sung-min's apartment in Bundang was empty. He had left sometime in the morning, taking his tablet and a suitcase. His car was gone. The police were now treating it as a flight risk. Jun-ho asked about the 8 active cases. Director Han said that all 8 had been secured, their policies restored, the fraudulent payment redirects reversed. But there was a problem. Kang Soo-jin, the woman whose file had been accessed 3 weeks earlier, had not answered her phone. Her last known address was the one Jun-ho had visited. The police were sending a car. Jun-ho told Director Han that he knew where Kang Soo-jin lived. He was closer than any police car. He hung up and ran. The distance was 15 minutes on foot. He covered it in 8. He reached her building and pressed the buzzer for her apartment. No answer. He pressed again, then began pressing every buzzer in the building until someone let him in. He took the stairs to the 5th floor, 2 at a time, and knocked on her door. Silence. He knocked harder, calling her name. He heard a faint sound from inside, a shuffling, a weak voice. He stepped back and kicked the door near the lock. The frame splintered on the second kick. Inside, he found Kang Soo-jin on the floor of her small living room, barely conscious, a half-empty glass of water beside her. Her medication was scattered across the table, untouched for what looked like days. She was alive, but barely. Jun-ho called emergency services and stayed with her until the paramedics arrived. In the ambulance, a police officer told him that a neighbor had reported that a man in his 60s had been seen visiting the building the day before, asking about Kang Soo-jin. The description matched Park Sung-min. Kang Soo-jin was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. The doctors said she had missed several doses of her immunosuppressants and had developed a severe infection that, if left untreated for another 24 hours, would have been fatal. Jun-ho sat in the hospital waiting room, his hands still stained with dust from the broken doorframe. A detective from the Financial Crimes Unit found him there. Her name was Detective Choi, no relation, she assured him, to the shell company director. She had already reviewed the files Jun-ho had provided. She had questions. Jun-ho answered them all, his voice steady even as his hands trembled. He explained how he had noticed the anomaly, how he had built the spreadsheet, how he had followed the money to Meridian Advisory and the redirected payments. Detective Choi listened, taking notes, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she told him that Park Sung-min had not been found. His car had been discovered at a train station in Taejun, but there was no record of him buying a ticket. He might have switched vehicles. He might have gone anywhere. But she assured Jun-ho that the investigation was now active. The police had frozen all accounts linked to Park Sung-min and his brother-in-law. Choi Dae-young had been picked up at his home in Hong Kong by local authorities acting on an Interpol request. The shell company was being dissolved. The 47 cases were being reopened, not as administrative failures but as suspicious deaths. Jun-ho asked if there was anything else he could do. Detective Choi said there was not. She told him to go home, get some rest, and let them do their work. He nodded and stood to leave. At the door, she called his name. "What you did," she said, "most people would not have done. Most people would have looked at the numbers and looked away." Jun-ho did not know how to respond. He had not thought of it as courage. He had thought of it as the only logical conclusion. He left the hospital and walked home through streets that seemed, for the first time in weeks, ordinary. 3 weeks passed. Jun-ho returned to work, but his role had changed. Director Han had reassigned him to the compliance team, where his ability to see patterns in data was now being used to audit high-risk policies. His desk was moved out of the basement and into a glass-walled office on the 3rd floor. He did not ask for this, but he accepted it. He continued to check on the 8 people whose policies he had helped save. Lee Neung-soo was recovering, his treatments resumed. The others were being contacted by social workers assigned to ensure they were not isolated. Kang Soo-jin remained in the hospital, but her condition was stabilizing. She had no family to visit her, so Jun-ho visited on weekends. He brought books, magazines, sometimes just sat in the chair by her bed while she slept. She did not know the full story, only that a man from her insurance company had found her in time. Jun-ho did not correct her. The police investigation progressed. Park Sung-min remained missing, but evidence was mounting. Digital forensics had recovered deleted files from his tablet showing that he had personally selected each target based on a combination of disease cost, policy value, and absence of family. The redirected payments had been traced to accounts controlled by his brother-in-law, and the consulting fees from Meridian Advisory had ultimately flowed back to Park Sung-min through a series of cryptocurrency transactions. The prosecution was preparing charges of fraud, embezzlement, and if the medical examiners could prove causation, manslaughter in the 47 deaths. Jun-ho followed the news quietly, not seeking it out but unable to avoid it. His name appeared in a single article, described as a company employee who raised concerns. He did not give interviews. He did not want to be a public figure. He wanted to go back to the quiet work of organizing data, but he knew that was no longer possible. The pattern had changed him. On a gray Tuesday morning in early November, Jun-ho received a phone call from Detective Choi. Park Sung-min had been apprehended at a guesthouse in Busan, where he had been living under a false name for 2 weeks. He had not fled the country, the detective explained, because his passport had been flagged at all ports of entry. He had been waiting, perhaps hoping that the investigation would lose momentum. It had not. Jun-ho asked if Park Sung-min had said anything. Detective Choi hesitated, then told him that Park Sung-min had asked how he had been found. When told that an archivist had discovered the pattern, he had laughed. Not a mocking laugh, the detective said, but something else. Surprise, perhaps. Or resignation. Jun-ho did not know what to make of that. He thanked the detective and hung up. That evening, he went to the hospital to see Kang Soo-jin. She was sitting up in bed, eating a small meal, her color better than it had been in weeks. She asked him, for the first time, why he kept coming. She said she knew he was not a relative, not a social worker. She wanted to know what had really happened. Jun-ho sat in the chair by her bed and told her. Not all of it, he spared her the details of the 47 who had not survived, but enough. He told her about the pattern he had found, the list of names, the alert that had led him to her door. He told her that she had been chosen because she had no one, but that someone had found her anyway. She listened without speaking. When he finished, she looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You found me because you were looking. No one else was." Jun-ho nodded. He did not know what else to say. He stayed until the nurses came to dim the lights, then walked home through streets that felt, for the first time, not ordinary, but survivable. 6 months later, the trial of Park Sung-min began. Jun-ho was called as a witness. He took the stand and spoke in the same calm, methodical voice he had always used. He explained the data, the pattern, the 47 files that had been buried in the archive. He did not embellish. He did not speculate. He simply showed the court what he had seen. The prosecution presented the financial records, the forensic evidence, the testimony of the 8 surviving policyholders whose lives had been saved by Jun-ho's intervention. Kang Soo-jin was among them. She walked into the courtroom with a cane, her health slowly returning, and told the court that she had been days away from death when Jun-ho broke down her door. She said she had no one in the world, and that she had accepted her death until a stranger came to prove her wrong. Park Sung-min was convicted on 47 counts of fraud and embezzlement, and on 8 counts of attempted manslaughter. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The insurance company paid reparations to the families of the 47 victims and established a new oversight unit to prevent similar abuses. Jun-ho was offered a promotion to lead that unit. He accepted. He continued to visit Kang Soo-jin, who had moved to a small apartment with a garden where she grew vegetables and regained her strength. They were not romantically involved, as some of his colleagues assumed. They were something else, 2 people who had been alone, who had found each other in the narrow space between a pattern and its consequence. Jun-ho sometimes returned to the basement archive, not to work, but to sit in the quiet and remember the 47 names he had pulled from the darkness. He had not saved them. But he had made sure they were not forgotten. And in the end, that was what an archivist did. He kept the records that no one else wanted to see, until someone was finally willing to look.